Kick off. Okay, everybody, hello. I'm Frances Anderton, and I'm sitting in my daughter's bedroom in Los Angeles. Well, actually, Santa Monica to be precise. And I met some of you a couple of weeks back when, at Alicia Pavaro's invitation, I joined the bedtime reading series, and I went back to 1975 and I read from the book Ecotopia, written by Ernest Callenbach, who sadly is now dead. But anyway, his book has lived on, and it has a particular resonance now because it's somewhat of a fantasy, but it's a fantasy based on the reality he perceived at the time in terms of societal, technological changes that were happening in Northern California, and he dreamed up a country that would secede from America because its people didn't like the militaristic and highly consumerist culture of the US of A. So anyway, I'm going to get to his book. I'm going to get back to his book. It's 170 pages, and 2 weeks ago we were at the beginning of the book, and now I'm going to take you through to the end of the book. But just to kick off, I'm actually going to go to somebody who's very, very contemporary, and he's a man that some of you may be familiar with. I got to know him very recently. He's based in the Netherlands. I'm probably going to just mangle his name, but his name is Wouter van Steenvoort, and he teaches at the University of Delft, and he teaches something called Design as Politics. And I think right now we would all agree that design, or the design of cities, is being manifested as an expression of our politics, of our lifestyle, our culture, etc., etc. And now's the time, ideally, to kind of have a think about that. Maybe a reset, to use Alicia's words when she first sent out the request for me to join this. So anyway, I'm going to read a quick bit from Wouter. He's going to be, I interviewed him, and he's going to be on the show that I host, just coming up tomorrow, actually. But I want to share with you some of his gems because he's really, really interesting. And basically, what he says is that this pandemic is both a source of trauma and obviously sadness for some, and pain, and all of those things. But it's also, in his words, clarifying. Okay, and here's why he says it's clarifying. He says, well, there's two things which are seemingly unconnected. The first is that we need a very, very strong public sector. We cannot do without a strong public health system and also social benefits. That's the first thing. The other thing, and he says, probably in Los Angeles, the sky must be beautifully open and clear, which it is. You can see the mountains, which is true, and often you can't. Now, the place where he lives, Rotterdam, we have the most polluted air in Europe, next to the north of Italy. And suddenly the air pollution is much, much less so. So the other thing that this pandemic has clarified for me is that the current economic system, excuse me, I'm just getting another bit of paper, that we have is incompatible with our health and our future. Because you could say, look how we can clean up the air in a matter of weeks, but we can't clean up the air otherwise, because nobody would have been able to do this. It's only through force majeure, like the pandemic, that we're forced to do it. I think the failure basically of most countries to do something about it is because they are so reliant, nearly addicted to a fossil fuel economy. And I think the fact that our economy is now collapsing, but the environment is cleaning up, proves that our economy and our environment are as status quo incompatible. It's either one or the other. Either we save our current economy or we save the environment and ourselves. So I think it's a very interesting contention, because where that takes us then, and I asked him about this, is, okay, if you follow on from that argument, if you agree that the two are incompatible, a booming economy and clean skies, alleviating climate change, etc., does that mean that we have to contract our economy, have an economy that produces less? So I asked him that, and he says, That's precisely the point. The fact that we cannot construct our economy without damaging the life of millions of people, points to a very fundamental weakness of our economy. And that's besides the environmental costs. It's that our economy is a boom and bust economy, not just on a macroeconomic scale, but on a personal scale. Either you go boom or you go bust as a person in this economy. And he says the evidence for this is that people started losing their jobs a week into the lockdown, showing how, in his words, incredibly brittle and damaging our current economic system is. Small businesses, small companies, families, all being hurt economically by this, even in Europe. So the pandemic shows a systemic failure of our current economy to deal with contraction and to deal with environmental issues. And he goes on, and he's incredibly interesting. And to be honest, I have to say this, he does talk about the role of designers and architects and the whole design community, because we're very much part of the sort of globe-trotting community that's sort of bound up with the economy as we know it, as we understand it. So anyway, I read from Wouter as a setup to go back to the future, as it were, back to 1975 and back to our character who we met 2 weeks ago, who's called William Weston. And he's the journalist from America who has ventured into Ecotopia, which is the seceded part of Northern California, encompassing San Francisco and... Hi, I'm so sorry. A call came in and it stopped the Instagram. I didn't know that would happen. Anyway, so we have William Weston, who's the journalist, and he is reporting from Ecotopia for the Times Post newspaper in the US. And he's gone there very skeptical, cynical even, and he's been determined to kind of poo-poo this new country as this silly place created by a bunch of hippies and who've got this thing called a stable state economy, and how ridiculous that all is. And his first reports, and by the way, I should say the book is divided into two forms of storytelling. There's his personal notes where he writes what he really thinks, and then there's the articles that he does for the Times Post. And we notice as the book progresses that his personal notes are getting softer and softer with regards to how he feels about Ecotopia, but he's still trying to maintain a kind of skeptical journalist objectivity, so-called, in his articles. So anyway, here we are. He's starting to really kind of, despite himself, settle in. He started an affair with a woman called Marissa, who's wonderfully liberated and sexually like no woman he's ever experienced, because in Ecotopia they're all much more chill about their bodies and sexuality. So you can read that part for yourself if you read the book. And he's really wants to learn more about, he's really starting to sort of get to grips with this idea of the stable state. So, but anyway, the way he's getting to grips is more and more conversations with people. And I'm going to start with a conversation that he talks about in his notes, a conversation he has with a new friend called Bert, okay? And he says to Bert, doesn't this stable state business get awfully static? I think it would drive you crazy after a certain point. And Bert goes on to say, he says, don't forget, we don't have to be stable. The system provides the stability and we can be erratic within it. I mean, we don't try to be perfect. We just try to be okay on the average, which means adding up a bunch of ups and downs. And he's referencing the fact that they've contracted the economy, like Wouter van der Swout was suggesting, and they're just not producing as much. And their incomes did initially decline, but they've arrived at a sort of balanced state where everything is, what's the word? Cradle to cradle, I guess it is, cradle to cradle economy. And they've arrived at a kind of stability. And he says, Our system meanders on in its peaceful way, while yours has constant convulsions, just like Wouter said. I think of ours as like a meadow in the sun. There's a lot of change going on. Plants growing, other plants dying, bacteria decomposing them, mice eating seeds, hawks eating mice, a tree or two beginning to grow up and shade the grasses. But the meadow sustains itself on a steady state basis, unless men come along and mess it up. So William says, I begin to see what you mean. I guess it may not look so static to a mouse. So he goes on, he's ruminating on all the different things that he's been observing while he's in Ecotopia. And more on the money, he starts to look at kind of literally what the money looks like. Money. Ecotopian bills seemed comic when I first saw them, yet 3 weeks later I find them more romantic than the greenbacks, as in dollars, left in my wallet. They're very romantic in style, lush, Rousseau-like scenes, almost tropical, with strange beasts and wondrous plants. No images of famous Ecotopian leaders. When asked why not, people just laugh. Maybe it's a consequence of their informal, utilitarian attitude toward money. They bundle it up into rolls and toss it to each other in an offhand manner I've only observed among gamblers. And then he goes on into other aspects of their lives. Habitations. You seldom see any store-bought furniture in Ecotopian houses. They have mattress beds on bare floor, enormous barbaric beds built of heavy timbers as if for ancient Vikings. And on he goes. I've now visited several Ecotopian family groups. And here's something that he observes that's quite interesting. And I'm still amazed at their quietness. After independence, I'm told, great efforts were made to noise-proof things. And clearly this is something that Callenbach thinks is kind of a sort of sickness of our over-consumerist society. It's like there's just endless noise. A lot of work was put into developing virtually soundless versions of many machines and appliances. Thus, refrigerators, which among us produce a daily quota of shimmies, jiggles, grunts and rumbles, are silent models which run on household septic tank methane. Very simple design, not so frost-free, but uses far less energy, I'm told. As we know, septic tank systems, have become more widely used since this book. The other great source of urban noise, cars, have of course been eliminated because there's no cars in Ecotopia. Clothes washers and dryers, which can't be made silent, are usually kept outside in separate huts. Dishwashers, perhaps our most annoying appliance, are not manufactured at all. If I can get over minding the quiet, it may be nice to be subjected only to natural noises, the wind, music from other houses, footsteps, a baby crying. So on he goes. And now I'm going to take us back for a moment to one of his objective articles that he writes for the Times Post. I'm jumping about a bit, but what's so interesting is the ruminating in this book on all the many aspects of the creation of a society. And we've just talked about this sort of stable state economy, but there are still taxes in Ecotopia. And how do the taxes work, and is there a central government and all of that kind of thing? And he basically writes, the Ecotopians largely dismantle their national tax and spending systems. This enabled people to deliberatively think about how they now wish to arrange their collective lives and what this meant for population levels and distribution. With better conditions in the countryside, the great concentrations of people in San Francisco, Oakland, Portland, Seattle, and even smaller metropolitan areas began to disperse somewhat. New mini-cities grew up in favourable locations, with their own linkage necklaces of transit lines, Napa on its winding Seine-like river, Carquinez Martinez stretching out along rolling hills. And on it goes. Decentralisation, something that's being talked about right now because the pandemic, at least in America, has shown how crazy it is to have all your healthcare services concentrated on one massive hospital, and then the rural villages have no hospital at all because they were private and they were shut down, which literally has happened or has been exposed recently. Anyway, decentralisation affected every aspect of life. Medical services were dispersed. The claim is that instead of massive hospitals in the city centres besieged by huge lines of waiting patients, there were small hospitals and clinics everywhere and a neighbourhood-oriented system of medical aids. Schools were broken up and organised on a novel, teacher-controlled basis. Agriculture, fishery, forestry also reorganised and decentralised. Large factory farms broken up through a strict enforcement of irrigation acreage regulations, which had been ignored before. I think you'll agree it all feels sort of very prescient and rather wonderful. So back to the taxes, usually a boring topic, but interesting when you think about how they shape a city. Instead of relying on a powerful central tax collection agency that can attach incomes directly, the central government now has to placate and cajole the local governments to ensure a continued flow of funds. But there's a welfare system, albeit a small one, which guarantees ecotopians a life, and this is like Andrew Yang, who ran briefly for president here, a lifetime guarantee of minimal levels of food, housing and medical care. So while some citizens, especially those working on untried developments in the arts, utilise this guarantee to exist without jobs, sometimes for years, most people find that it's desirable to work in order to provide themselves with a lively social life. But still, this is like a very enlightened conversation about having a sort of a basic income. Despite the severe criticisms made of the ecotopian economic and tax system by our American experts, direct observation can thus only support the claims of ecotopian spokespeople. However welcome these may be, the system is now an integral part of ecotopian life and it is not going away. Okay, that was his report. Now we're back to his notes. I've just read the last couple of columns and I realised that my attitudes towards the place have changed a lot in the last 3 weeks. And it's not just because of Marissa. Am I getting soft in my writing? Maybe I didn't know what the really penetrating questions to be asked on the economic stuff. Or maybe I'm getting some kind of all-over snow job. This whole ecotopian experiment seemed to me at first a silly provincial attempt to construct a decent society when every place else was going down the drain. But I knew it couldn't work. It had to be some kind of fraud. I hadn't believed the rumours about forced labour and Stone Age degeneracy and all that crap, but I guess I really did expect to find there was something terribly wrong with it, some obvious horrible flaw that meant that after all we didn't really have to pay any serious attention to it. And my reports would end up documenting that and it would make it all go away. But it's not going away. In fact, the more closely I look at the fabric of ecotopian life, the more I am forced to admit its strength and its beauty. And that just leaves me at a total loss. I don't seem to have an attitude to write from anymore. All I can do is call the individual separate shots as I see them. Am I losing my objectivity? Will Max, that's his editor back at the Union Post, will Max start cutting my copy? Maybe I don't really understand anything anymore, or at least not the way I used to think I did. So anyway, it's all very interesting and again, kind of really, again, resonates with now because I think a lot of us have just been forced to really meditate on our circumstances right now. So while we're meditating, I'm just going to take a quick detour into the architecture, okay? And again, this book was written in the mid-1970s Northern California. So when I describe the houses that he witnesses, you're probably going to think, this was based on what was being tested around then by actual builders. Okay, most ecotopian buildings are wood because the ecotopians love wood best. However, they also build extruded houses made of a plastic derived from cotton. The Ecotopians show great ingenuity in making them. They start with a standard section about 12 feet long, light enough to be lifted by 4 men. Then they're cut off at one angle and glued together, producing a square house, or on a different angle, a hexagonal or octagonal house. You glue the sections together into an irregular zigzag shape or make them into a long looping string with branches or protrusions, including a kind of compound. That's a common pattern for the extended family groups that they have living in the open country. You can build a central space out of wood or stone. You can cut doors or windows with a few minutes' work. And not only can the sections be glued together by unskilled labour, but their cost is very low. I've just inspected one of the plants in which these extruded houses are produced. It resembles one of our car washes. A large vat cooks the ingredients into a foam-type mouldable plastic. The foam is then squirted under pressure through a large oval slot and hardens as it comes in contact with the air. After passing over some supporting rollers, it has window holes punched if desired and then is sprayed inside out with a hard surface plastic. This has a strange neutral colour and resembles a dried corn leaf, which is not surprising since it's derived from corn plants. It's washable, can be painted throughout, and modestly fits in with natural landscapes. Finally, the tubing is cut off into different lengths and stored in a nearby field until needed. Ecotopians are always talking of integrated systems, by which they mean devices that cater to several of their ecological fetishes all at once. The extruded house system offers a number of examples, and probably the most startling is the bathroom. Ecotopians have put into practice an early notion of our architects and produce entire bathrooms in one huge moulded piece, containing all the bathroom components, including a space heater. A companion unit is buried outside, connected by 2 flexible hoses to the septic tank, which not only digests sewage, but produces methane gas in the process, which in turn operates the heater. The effluent that runs out the other end is not at all repulsive, but clear and excellent for watering gardens, so that ordinarily the garden is placed adjacent to the bathroom. Well, we all know that some of these devices or systems somewhat similar to that are becoming more commonplace even in Los Angeles, and so there's something very, again, prescient about this book. Okay, back to his notes. He's really coming to terms with the septic tanks and so on and so forth, and he's now in bed with his lady, Marissa. And I should remind you, in case you've forgotten, that this is a place where women are very much empowered, at least relative to the mid-1970s. And the way William describes it is they're not in a sort of dependent role, and they basically now seem to run the country, and they're very empowered over their bodies. So he's really fallen for Marissa, and he starts to see that he says, I've fallen in love with her country as much as with Marissa. A new self has been coming to life within me here, thanks to both her and her people. This new me is a stranger, an ecotopian, and his advent fills me with terror, excitement, and strength. But I'm ready for it at last. I don't know what it'll all mean, how we will live, or even where, but all the possibilities seem natural and inviting. I want to stay at the forest camp for a while. I've never lived in such close touch with natural surroundings, and I'd like to know what it's like to work with my hands. There were painful breaks ahead with Francine, who's his girlfriend back in the US. And by the way, a lot of the book sort of meditates on the kind of decline of close relationships in the US and the kind of synthetic nature of relationships or something, and how much more authentic relations are in Ecotopia. That's another running theme. And that those authentic relationships do tip over sometimes into, I guess I guess they're exploring it's the 70s, so they're not so keen on the idea of monogamy. So that's sort of a theme as well, and where that takes you. Read the book to find out about all that. Anyway, painful breaks ahead with Francine, his girlfriend, and Pat, his ex-wife. But he's going to stay in Ecotopia. He's going to have his kids come out for the summer. If that takes a diplomatic passport, well, the American president, owes me a favour, because he had come to try and use his articles to build closer relationships between the US and Ecotopia, because the US is crazy angry that Ecotopia has been such a success. And he says, I want to try out some different kinds of writing. There are a lot more things about Ecotopia that the rest of the world needs badly to know. Maybe I can help in that. So I think we're getting nearly to the end. So yes, we are. So I'm sorry about my hair. This is like 6 weeks of being stuck indoors and it's just a bird's nest. But hopefully the tie-dyed sun behind me that was done for my daughter by a mum at her school when she was in elementary school, hopefully it distracts from the bird's nest on my head. Anyway, super quickly, here's a reflection from Ernest Callenbach, who wrote the book. He died in 2012. This is what he says about Ecotopia. Ecotopia was initially rejected by 20 New York publishers. It only saw print because generous friends invested in a vest pocket publishing enterprise to bring it out, a bit like a GoFundMe. Yet now it has sold almost 1 million copies. Nice hair, Chill. Now it has sold almost 1 million copies in 9 languages, and the term ecotopian is understood worldwide. The little book's life continues to amaze me. When the employee-owned distributor Book People agreed to take a few hundred copies of the original edition and see if they would sell, I had very modest expectations. But people responded strongly to the book. Finally, the New York Times, which disdained to review it, ran a news story about the, quote, little book that could. The book took him 3 years to write. He did tons of research, talked to lots of people about it, trying to build a whole society. And this is what he says about constructing a society. He says, looking back, it seems clear that Ecotopia was the first attempt to portray a sustainable society, and that this, rather than its modest literary merit, explains its durability. He says, constructing an imaginary society is a little like designing a game. The society involves rules, principles and conventions, and the author is not entirely in charge. Ecotopia, he says, is not a futurist book that simply attempts to project trends, nor does it portray a utopia, an imaginary country where everything is entirely perfect forever. He says the title comes from the Greek roots meaning home and place, so home place, and we know that homes are not perfect forever. Neither, he says, is it science fiction. Perhaps it is politics fiction, based on the assumption that a critical mass of people could come to see that their survival and happiness depend upon giving at least as much weight to the biological bottom line as to the economic one. So I'm going to leave it there. I think we're just about at 8:30 in London. And it's been really great to share this with you. The book is Ecotopia. The author is Ernest Callenbach. If you want to hear more from Wouter, go to kcrw.com/DNA in the coming days, and my conversation with him will be up. And in the meantime, thank you, Alicia. Alicia, this was brilliant. Alicia's brilliant concept. I'm very honoured to have been included, and hope that our paths will cross again somehow, and that we'll all be living in a better world. Bye. Bye. Thank you. Lots of hearts and stars. I don't know how to send the hearts and stars back, but I'm sending them verbally with some sunshine, with some California sunshine. Bye. Thank you. Okay, I think I'm meant to do something now. What am I supposed to do?